you were standing at the window. Or maybe you were outside, coffee in hand, watching the feeder. The yard was alive house finches on the perches, a chickadee coming in for sunflower, a cardinal waiting in the shrub just beyond. And then, without warning, without any sound you could hear, every single one of them was gone. Not one at a time, not gradually. All of them. In the same instant, the feeder swayed. The yard was empty. You looked up at the sky and saw nothing. You looked at the tree line and saw nothing. You stood there in the sudden silence wondering what just happened, and the moment passed so fast you almost convinced yourself you imagined it. You didn't imagine it. What you witnessed was one of the most sophisticated alarm systems in the natural world, and it had nothing to do with anything you did. Every bird in that yard received the same signal at the same moment, decoded it with more precision than most humans give them credit for, and made an instantaneous, coordinated decision about their own survival. And here's what almost no one who watches birds ever learns. The signal has layers. It carries information. It identifies the threat, estimates the risk, and assigns a response, and the birds in your yard act on that information collectively, even when they've never met each other. Subscribe now, because what you're about to understand will completely change the way you watch your yard. You will never see an empty feeder the same way again. Most people assume the yard empties because something scared the birds. That's true in the way that saying thunder is loud is true accurate, but missing almost everything that matters. What actually happens in the second before every bird disappears is a cascade, a ripple of information moving through multiple species almost simultaneously. The birds didn't all happen to notice the same thing. One bird noticed, and the rest responded to that bird. This is the first thing researchers studying alarm behavior had to untangle. Were birds reacting to a predator directly, or reacting to each other, reacting to a predator? The answer, which scientists at institutions, including the University of Florida and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, have spent years confirming, is largely the second. Most of the birds in your yard never see the hawk. They hear the bird that did. But here's what elevates this beyond instinct. The response isn't uniform. It's calibrated. Birds in your yard don't all do the same thing when the signal comes. Some freeze, some flush upward, some drop into dense cover. Some, particularly the species that have eaten with you for years, take a route toward the house rather than away from it. The calibration depends on what the signal said. Not just that danger is coming, but what kind, from which direction, and how close. The yard empties in 1 second. But before it empties, a decision was made. A collective, multi-species, information-based decision that happened faster than you can blink. And that decision was based on a language you've been surrounded by your entire life without knowing it existed. Most people assume birds startle the way a person startles a reflexive, undirected flinch. That assumption has been wrong for a very long time. There is a chickadee in your yard right now that knows, in measurable, demonstrable ways, the difference between a hawk hunting from the sky and a hawk perched in a tree. It communicates that difference to every other species within earshot, and the way it does it is one of the stranger discoveries in modern ornithology. The black-capped chickadee produces what researchers call a chickadee, call the one so familiar most backyard birders stop hearing it as information and start hearing it as ambient sound. That was a mistake. Because embedded in that call is a specific, decodable warning system. Christopher Templeton, working with Dr. Eric Green at the University of Montana, published findings in the journal Science that stopped the birding world. The number of D notes at the end of a chickadee's alarm call directly encodes threat level, but not in the way most people guess. Larger predators, like great horned owls, get fewer D notes. Smaller, more maneuverable predators, the ones capable of chasing a chickadee through dense branches, get more. A pygmy owl can produce a call with up to 17 D notes appended. That call means this predator can follow you into the shrubs. Do not simply hide. The researchers described being surprised by this. They had expected the encoding to correlate with predator size. It correlates with predator agility. The birds had categorized the threat in a way that was more sophisticated than the scientists' initial hypothesis. Other species have been shown to understand and respond to chickadee alarms even when they don't produce the same call themselves. Newthatches, titmice, white, breasted newthatches will stop foraging and look in the appropriate direction in response to a chickadee call they've decoded. Work published in the journal Animal Behavior demonstrated that the alarm isn't just broadcast, it's received and interpreted across species lines. The yard empties together, because they are, in a meaningful sense, listening to the same broadcast. There is a specific moment in every hawk strike that the birds in your yard have evolved to survive. It happens in under half a second, and understanding it will change the way you read what you see. When a Cooper's hawk, the most common feeder predator across North America, the one responsible for most of the abrupt yard empties you've experienced, enters your yard, it does not announce itself. It uses cover. It typically approaches low, using fences, shrubs, or the angle of a building to block its own silhouette until it is close enough to commit. The attack is nearly silent. The birds get no auditory warning from the hawk itself. What they get is visual, and the visual alarm system birds have developed is calibrated to something very specific: the looming response. Researchers studying avian visual processing have documented that birds detect the rapid expansion of a shape against the sky, what scientists call a looming stimulus, and respond neurologically in a way that bypasses conscious decision-making entirely. The response is subcortical. It happens before the bird has decided anything. The body is already moving. What's remarkable about this, and what makes the mass simultaneous flush so disorienting to watch, is that this looming response is shared across species with almost no lag time. When one bird detects the expansion of a threat and flushes, the flush itself becomes a looming stimulus for the birds around it. The panic propagates physically, not just acoustically. The first bird that moves triggers the visual alarm in every bird nearby. This is why the yard empties in the same second and not in a wave. The wave is moving faster than you can see it. But here is the part that most people don't realize. The birds know the difference between a flush caused by a real predator and a flush caused by a startle. Research from the University of Bristol showed that birds habituate to false alarms. They learn to distinguish between panics that were confirmed and panics that weren't. Over time, in a yard they know well, birds in your yard have developed a model of what real danger looks like versus noise. Which means your familiar birds, the ones that have been coming to your feeder for 2 or 3 seasons, have a more refined threat response than a stranger bird passing through. They've had more false alarms to calibrate against. They've learned your yard's rhythms. They know which flushes were real. Here is something worth sitting with the next time your yard empties. It almost certainly doesn't empty completely. While the finches and sparrows flush to the tree line and the chickadees drop into the dense interior of the nearest shrub, there is almost always at least one bird that stays. Not because it didn't receive the alarm, not because it was too slow to respond, but because its survival calculus pointed to a different answer. Mourning doves are among the most reliable flushers. When an alarm propagates, they are typically gone within a second, bursting upward in that distinctive whistling rush of wings that can itself trigger secondary alarms in nearby birds. House sparrows will compress into hedgerows collectively, almost vanishing into vegetation. Cardinals tend to drop low and go still before moving, using cover rather than distance. But dark-eyed juncos, particularly birds that have spent significant time in a familiar yard, will sometimes freeze in place rather than flush. White-throated sparrows do the same. Song sparrows have been documented dropping to the ground and pressing flat motionless, difficult to distinguish from leaf litter while every other species around them evacuates. This is not recklessness. It is an alternative strategy. And it is calculated. Research published in the journal Behavioral Ecology has examined what biologists call flush distance, the point at which a bird decides to flee rather than hold still, and found that it varies not just by species but by individual experience, body condition, and hunger level. A bird that has not eaten enough will tolerate a closer approach before fleeing. The cost of leaving a food source, when you weigh 70 grams and burn through calories quickly in cold weather, is real. Staying and freezing, for some species and some individuals, is the better bet. This means the birds that don't leave when your yard empties aren't anomalies or slow responders. They are experienced individuals that have made a different but equally informed decision. And in a yard where the threat turned out to be false, where the hawk passed through without striking those birds, are eating again before the finches have even returned to the tree line. Most people assume the birds that stay behind were the ones that didn't notice. They are often the ones that are noticed first. The hawk is gone. The yard is empty. And now something happens that almost no one who watches birds ever stops to observe carefully, because most people walk away from the window once the drama ends. The return is not random. It is structured. And the structure tells you something about how birds think about risk. The first bird to return to your feeder after a hawk event is almost never the bird that flushed last. It is typically a small, mobile species, a chickadee, a titmouse, a newthatch that makes what ornithologists and field researchers have come to call a sentinel return. This bird comes back before the others. It lands somewhere visible, not at the feeder itself, and it looks, it calls, it assesses. This behavior has been documented repeatedly in feeder monitoring studies. Certain individual birds consistently act as the first to return after alarm events, positioning themselves at elevated points and producing soft contact calls before resuming normal behavior. These calls, quiet, low-intensity sounds that carry only short distances, function as an all-clear signal. When the other birds hear them, they begin filtering back. Work conducted by researchers, including Ken Otter at the University of Northern British Columbia, has examined the social structure of mixed-species flocks that form around winter feeders, and what emerges is not a loose association of independent birds sharing a resource. It is something closer to a community, with established individuals playing consistent social roles, dominant birds that feed first, sentinel birds that return first, subordinate birds that wait for confirmation before committing. The bird you've been watching at your feeder every morning may not just be a regular visitor. It may be one of the individuals that the other birds are watching and waiting for. There is a rough timeline to the post-alarm return that experienced feeder watchers learn to read. In the first 60 to 90 seconds after a hawk flush, the yard stays empty. Then, the sentinel appears usually from the direction of the densest cover available. Then, the contact calls start. Then, typically 2 to 4 minutes after the flush, the yard is full again. The whole event, to a casual observer, looks like chaos followed by recovery. To the birds, it was managed from start to finish. Most people don't know there's a protocol. There is always a protocol. Here is an uncomfortable truth about your yard. The hawk you looked for in the sky after the flush may not have been the threat at all. The most statistically common cause of a full yard flush is not an aerial predator. It is a cat. The American Bird Conservancy estimates that free-roaming domestic and feral cats kill between 1 3 and 4 billion birds in the United States annually, a number so large it has to be read twice to register. But the impact on your yard is not just the birds that are killed. It is the birds that learn your yard is unsafe and stop coming. A cat does not need to catch a bird to damage a feeder community. It needs only to be seen. Research from the University of Exeter, published in the journal PLOS I, examined how cat presence near bird feeders affects bird behavior even in the complete absence of actual attacks. The results were striking. Birds significantly reduced their use of feeders in areas with known cat activity, and the effect persisted for days after the cat was last observed. The birds were not responding to an individual visit. They were updating their threat model of that location. But cats are not the only ground-level predator triggering your alarms. Sharp-shinned hawks, which are small enough to navigate dense shrubs and are built specifically to pursue small passerines in close quarters, are visually similar to Cooper's hawks but more maneuverable. Red-tailed hawks rarely bother with feeder birds. They are hunting rodents, rabbits, squirrels, and experienced birds in your yard likely know this. A red tail perching on a nearby telephone pole may produce only a mild response. A Cooper's cutting low across the yard produces a total evacuation. Raccoons, which are primarily crepuscular but will visit feeders in daylight, trigger ground-level alarm responses. Foxes do the same. In some suburban yards with established populations of Cooper's hawks hunting them seasonally, the birds develop what researchers describe as heightened baseline vigilance, spending more time scanning, feeding in shorter bursts, returning to cover more frequently between visits. Your yard's alarm history shapes the birds that live in it. A yard that has been hunted repeatedly produces more watchful birds that flush earlier, return more slowly, and spend less time exposed at the feeder. A yard that is genuinely safe produces more relaxed birds that linger longer, birds that become habituated to you specifically as a non-threatening presence. The safety of your yard is not just a fact, it is a reputation. And the birds in your yard have an opinion about it. Understanding that your yard operates as an alarm network changes how you can read it and changes what small decisions you make about how it's set up. Feeder placement matters more than most guides acknowledge. The standard advice place feeders near cover so birds have somewhere to flee is correct, but incomplete. The cover needs to be accessible from the feeder within a half-second flight, and it needs to be dense enough to obstruct a hawk's pursuit angle. Loose, sparse shrubs provide psychological comfort without functional protection. Dense, twiggy cover native viburnums, spicebush, holly, hawthorn provides actual protection, the kind that matters when a Cooper's hawk is 3 wing beats away. Spacing multiple feeders apart, rather than clustering them together, reduces the risk of a single hawk strike taking the entire feeding group. Birds spread across 2 or 3 stations have different sight lines, different flush angles, and create a wider alarm network. A bird at one station may see a threat approaching from an angle that birds at a second station cannot. The alarm propagates before the hawk arrives, removing ground-level threat corridors, keeping grass near the feeder trimmed so cats have nowhere to approach unseen, removing dense, low vegetation that could conceal a stalking predator dramatically reduces the alarm frequency in your yard. Research consistently shows that birds habituate faster to a feeder they trust. A yard that produces fewer genuine alarms produces calmer, more regular birds. And water matters in this context for a reason most people don't consider. A bird bath positioned with open sight lines in multiple directions, away from dense concealing cover, allows bathing birds to maintain vigilance. Birds bathe vulnerably, feathers wet, flight temporarily compromised, and they know it. A bird bath that feels exposed to the birds will be used infrequently or at the margins of daylight when predator activity is lower. A bath with clear sight lines and a clear flush path to cover will be used regularly, confidently, in the middle of the afternoon. What you're doing in all of this is not just providing food and water. You are managing threat perception. You are shaping how safe your yard feels to the community that has decided to inhabit it. And the community notices. I want to return to the moment we started with. You were at the window. The yard was alive. And then it wasn't. You know now that what happened in that second was not random, was not instinct in any simple sense, and was not chaos. It was a coordinated, multi-species, information-dense response to a signal that moved through your yard faster than you could see it. One bird detected something. That detection became a call, or a flush, or a looming shape, and every bird in the network received it and made a decision. Some fled. Some froze. One, probably, went somewhere high and waited to tell the others it was safe to come back. Most people who see that moment feel a vague unease, a small helplessness. There was something out there. They couldn't see it. And now the yard is empty and quiet in a way that feels like absence. I want to offer you a different way to feel it. What you witnessed was trust. Not trust in you specifically, though that is part of it. Trust in the network. Trust that the alarm means something. Trust that the all clear, when it comes, is real. The birds in your yard have built, over the seasons they have spent there, a shared understanding of that space, its rhythms, its dangers, its reliable refuges. They know which cover holds and which doesn't. They know which human at which window is a threat and which isn't. They know, in ways that have been scientifically confirmed and in ways that haven't been measured yet, more about your yard than you do. And when the yard goes silent in that single, synchronized second, they are not leaving you. They are doing exactly what they have always done, surviving, communicating, trusting each other in the same yard they have been doing it in every day, with or without an audience. The feeder will be full again in 4 minutes. The chickadee will come back first. You'll hear it before you see it. And somewhere in the sound it makes, there is a message being passed to every bird within earshot. The yard is safe. The yard is safe. You can come back now. You have been, without knowing it. Part of the reason they believe that. I want to know if you've ever caught that moment, the whole yard vanishing at once. Did you see what caused it? Or did the threat stay invisible? Leave your story in the comments. And if you know someone who keeps a feeder and has never understood why the birds suddenly disappear, share this with them. They deserve to know what they've been watching.